Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Sanhedrin Chavtes, Sanhedrin 29. We're going to start on the bottom of Chavtes on the base, on the last line of Chavtes on the base, last line of 28b. Today's Daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this day's Tzara. Gemara tells us that there's a dispute in our Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama about what happens if your person is related and then the relationship ends, either divorce or death. So the Tanakama says he's no longer related. He could be a witness or a judge. But Rabbi Huda says if there was a man or a son-in-law and his wife died, but he has kids from her, or if he was divorced and he has kids from her, he's still considered related. Whereas Rabbi Yossi clearly says he's not. So the Gemara says, and a following story, Bnei Chamud Mar Ukva. So the basically the children of the father-in-law of Mar Ukva, Krovim V'Nisrachlu, on top of 29b, they were relatives and then they became distant. Mar Ukva's wife, who was their sister, had died. Now Mar Ukva's wife was a very holy woman in the Shas. She was so careful about giving charity. She was even greater than her husband. Anyway, so she died and she left behind children in Mar Ukva. So her brothers were no longer related. So Habo Asel Kamil Adina, they came to Mar Ukva and said, "You be our judge." Amr Lahu, he said to them, "No, I can't. Pasil no Adina, I can't be your judge. I'm disqualified." So Amr Lay, my daitech, why? Here, Rabbi Yehuda, you think you're ruling like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that if you have children that you're still considered related to us? So Anan, my Sinan, Igarta Maraba, we're going to bring you a leather from Eretz Yisrael. The Ein Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. We don't pass like the Rabbi Yehuda. So you can be our judge. Amar Lahu, Atu Bekava Dekara Id Bakna Buchu. You think I'm connected to you by like a kav of wax? No, the Kamina Pisil no Chuadina. I'm not saying that I am disqualified. I'm not saying that I'm disqualified to be your judge. Ela mishum the wotzai sudina. The reason why I don't want to be your judge is because, excuse me, you're my brothers-in-law. You're not going to listen to me. You're going to think you're my peer, so forget about it. So that's why I don't want to be your judge. It said in our Mishnah, and an Ohev, somebody who's your dear friend, is disqualified, and that refers to a sheshvino, a groomsman. Bekama, how long is he disqualified during the wedding season? So Amar Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yirmi, Amar Rab, called Shivat Yemei Mishnah, the whole 7 days of celebration. Rabbana Mishmei de Rava, Amar Afil Miyom Rishon Ye'el. Even from the first day onward, he's going to be disqualified. Meaning, just to say, after the first day onward, he's going to be qualified to be the judge. It's only the first day that he's not qualified, but that he's disqualified to be the witness or the judge. But after that, he's going to be qualified. Then it says, Hasone, the enemy is also disqualified. That's somebody who didn't speak with you for 3 days out of enmity. What's the source for this idea? The Gemara cites a brisa, which cites a pasuk, that if somebody kills accidentally and he was not his enemy, then Gemara says, if he's not his enemy, then we could testify. So, and he doesn't, and he hadn't sought bad. So if he hadn't sought anything bad, he can be the judge. Only if he hadn't sought anything bad can he be the judge. Ashkechan Sone, we find that somebody who's an enemy is not allowed to be the judge. And what's the source that somebody who is your dear friend is not allowed to be your witness? Kari Behachi, read the pasuk like this. He's not his enemy. And also we should read in and he's not his dear friend. He could be the witness. So, and he doesn't seek bad. And also we read in so if he doesn't seek anything good for him, he could be the judge. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? It doesn't say these words. It doesn't say he likes him so much in the pasuk. The whole reason why the Oyev cannot be the judge is it's logical. Oyev, my time. What's the reason that the Oyev can't be the judge? Mishum de merchaka date. Because they have there's such a distance between them in their mindset. Oev Nami Mekarva Daite, and Oev is also, he's so close, so he can't be the witness or the judge. Rabbanan Hailo Yevo Mavakish Ras, oh my Darshmi. Rabbanan who learned that verse, Lo Yevo What do they do from that? What do they do from that pasuk? The Gemara says they say the opposite. They say chad. They say chad ledayan, and one is to teach us that he can't be the judge, and idach the other one is kedetanya. It's to teach us this idea. Two Torah scholars who hate each other are not allowed to sit in judgment on the same court. Because if they're not sitting, if they're not on the same page, if they don't like each other, they're not going to be able to come to an effective decision. You need some people who respect each other to come to a good working arrangement. It says the Mishnah, how do we investigate the witnesses? How do we examine them? So we don't go into the questions that we ask them yet. We're going to go into the exact questions later on. But first, you bring them into a room. We warn them, we intimidate them. And after that, we take out everybody else. We leave behind the greatest of the witnesses. We say, tell us how we know that this one is responsible. If he says he told me, if he says he told me, or or this man told me that he owes him the money, that's not sufficient, and we'll see why in the Gemara. Until he tells us in front of us, he admitted to us that he owes him a time. Meaning, say, unless he says in front of us, he admitted to the hey, Hobbs, good morning. In front of us, he admitted to us that he owes this person 200 zuz. We're in the middle of the Mishnah on 29a. And afterwards, we bring in the second person who both can also, and we investigate him. If we find that their words are matching, then we go to the deliberations of the evidence. Let's say Shnaim Omer Zakai Echad Omer Chayev Zakai. If two say he's innocent and one say he's responsible, he's innocent. Shnaim Omer Chayev Echad Omer Zakai. Two say he's responsible, one say he's innocent. Chayev. Echad Omer Chayev and Echad Omer Zakai. One says innocent, one says guilty. Even two say innocent or two guilty. One says I don't know. Then we're going to add on judges. Once they completed the deliberations, then we bring the parties back in. The greatest of the judges, meaning the senior judge, Omer, he announces the decision. This one's innocent, this one's guilty. And how do we know that when they leave the court, they can't say, listen, I ruled innocently, but my friend ruled that you were guilty. And they're the majority. About this, it says that this is the prohibition of rachilos, of being just a gossip monger. Even though you're not saying anything bad, you're not allowed to go around just gossiping. This is exactly the opposite. I don't know if it's exactly the opposite, but this is not consistent with American judicial system, where there's a concept of a minority opinion and we know exactly how each of the judges voted. But here we're saying that when you do a halacha, when you have a halachic discussion, we always record the minority opinion. Here, when it comes to a judicial decision, the court speaks as one. And the one court is, and this is the one court. And the court speaks as one. And you don't know how each judge voted. So the Gemara says, how do we warn the witnesses? We say to them as follows. It says that the way we do it is we say as follows, meaning to say that the wind and the rain will be stopped even when there are clouds. Nisim is a cloud, because when there's a person who is exalting himself with falsehoods. So Rava says, well, that's not going to stop the guy. He doesn't care. He'll let everybody have a drought. He could say, okay, look, for 7 years there was a famine, but on my gate, the gate of this craftsman, It didn't come. He says, okay, the whole world will have a famine, but I'll be okay. No, we warn him by saying as follows. We say the following. We say, Mefitz v'cher v'chet shanun, basically the sword, the spear, and the sharp arrow. Ish oneh b're'eo eight sheker is somebody who testifies falsely about his friend. So that's how we tell him, you're going to get the sword. Amar Ravashi, Yachol Meimer, listen, Shev Shamna have musna ve'inish b'lo shnei lo shachav. There could be a plague for 7 years, but a man doesn't die if it's not his time. And you say, when it's my time to go, I'll go. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it. Amar Ravashi, Amrli Nazim Bar Marzutra, the Nazim Bar Marzutra said to me, this is what we say. Amrinalu Saadi Shakri Augrayu Zili. That the false witnesses, even the ones who hire them, don't respect them. Shivu Shnayim Anashim B'nei Blial Negdo V'yayidu Emor V'yagidu Emor Berachta Elokim V'melach. So basically, this goes from the story of Achav and Izevo and Navot in the story in Kings, where they wanted to get his vineyard, so they hired false witnesses to claim that that Navot had cursed the king. And so we see from here that they said, get 2 men who are blial, who are disgusting people. So even the ones who hired them think that they're disgusting. And if he says, he told me, let's say he says, the witness says, he told me he owes him money, we don't believe him. Until the witness has to say, not that he admitted to me, but that he admitted it in front of the defendant, in front of the plaintiff, that he owes the money. Messiah Rabbi Yehuda, this supports the position of Rabbi Yehuda. It's not enough to just admit that he owes somebody money. You have to say, it has to be an admission in front of witnesses. Say, you are my witnesses that I owe this man money. And in Rabbi Yochanan, that Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, let's say he says, Reuben says to Shimon, you owe me $100, and Shimon says, he says, yes, I do. And Machar, Amarlo, so the next day Reuben says, Taneli, give it to me. Amarlo, Mashata Nibacha. He says, no, I was just joking with you. Well, guess what, Potter? He's exempt. He doesn't have to pay. We believe him to say I was joking. Well, meaning it's not an admission unless there's the plaintiff and there's witnesses and he knows it's a serious admission. Not only that, even if he hides witnesses behind the fence, he says, you owe me $100. Hey, and he says, yes. And he says, and he says, admit it. Do you want to admit it in front of these 2 witnesses? And he doesn't know that they're hiding. And he says, no, I don't want to admit it because maybe they'll take me to court. And the next he says, give it to me. He says, I was joking, Potter. He's exempt. And we don't make a claim for a masis. What's a masis? A masis is somebody who incites other people to do idolatry. Masis, the Gemara says, Mandachar Shmei. Mandachar Shmei is, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? You ever hear that expression, Hobbs? It's like all of a sudden you change topics. Like I'm talking to you about the Gemara, and they say, and the stock market's up. What was talking about the stock market? Mandachar Shmei. Who mentioned the name? Well, who mentioned anything about a masis? What's it doing in the Brisa? So the Gemara says, Kisuri Mechsura, the Brisa is missing some words. This is how we read it. In Lotan, if the person doesn't make the claim and says, I was joking, ain't tone and low. We don't make a claim on his behalf. The defendant has to make his own claim. Ubedine nefashos, but if it be a capital case, afagav Lotan, even though we didn't make the claim, tone and low. We make a claim for a defendant in a capital case, except we don't make a claim for a person who incites others to do idolatry. Maishna mesis, why not by the mesis? I heard Shani mesis. The Torah says you're not allowed to have compassion, not allowed to have mercy on him by the mesis. So we don't try to protect the mesis. So then the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman Rabbi Yohanan Saminayin Shein Tonel Mesis. How do we know that we don't make a claim for the mesis? Minachash akadmoni, from the ancient snake. The snake had many claims. He could have said, he could have had a good defense attorney. He could have hired the best defense attorney, and he would have gotten off. The snake had many claims, and we didn't make the claims on his behalf. Why did God not make the claims on his behalf? Because since the snake didn't make it, and therefore God didn't make it on his behalf. What could the snake have said? He could have said, why is it my fault that Eve ate from the tree and Adam ate from the tree? They shouldn't have listened to me. Divrei Rav, Divrei Talmud, Divrei Mishomin. If the Rebbe said something and the student says something, you listen to the Rebbe. They should have listened to you, God. They heard it from you. Why are they listening to me? It's not my fault. We have a concept. This is one of the reasons why you can't have an agency for sin. You're responsible for your own actions. Not my fault. So the snake could have said that, but since he was a mason, he convinced them to do idolatry. Why is this idolatry? If you only have one commandment in the world and you don't keep it, that's a source of idolatry. Of course, we're going to listen to the he should have listened to the master. He shouldn't have listened to me. So that would have been his complaint. So Tosfos asked the question: if that's the case, then every mason should be able to exempt himself by saying they shouldn't have listened to me in the first place. So the Tosfos says, yeah, that could work in general, but generally speaking, everybody else by the snake, he wasn't commanded not to incite to sin, but everybody else is commanded, and so therefore they lose that ability. So therefore, the Gemara says, Amar Chizkiah. So now we have a beautiful teaching. They're all beautiful, but this one I remember since I was in high school. So says Chizkiah, Minayin Shikor Mosif Goreya. How do we know that anybody adds on to the Torah is actually taking away from the Torah, as it says in the pasuk in Bereshis that Eve says to the snake, that Chava says to the snake, she says, hold on, I just want to say something. The Chava says to the snake that God says, don't eat from the snake and don't touch it. God didn't say, don't touch it. Adam and Eve added on, don't eat from it and don't touch it. And so since they added on this phrase, that's the first person to add on to the Torah. That's actually a sin. If they had said, God says don't eat it, and I don't even want to touch it because that might lead me to eating, that would have been a sin. But because they said God said don't touch it, that was the sin. And Rashi tells us that the snake pushed Eve into the tree, and she touched a tree, and nothing happened to her. He says, you see, nothing happened if you touch it, nothing's going to happen if you eat it. So we see from here the very first sin that man committed was trying to add on to the Torah. So that's a tremendous sin of adding on to the Torah. I'll tell you how we know whoever adds on is taken away. It says, 2.5 amos is its length. But if you take away the aleph, it would be 200 amos is its length. Rashi Amar 11 yirios. But if you take away the ayin, it will be 12 curtains on top of the Mishkan. We see from here, whoever adds on is actually taking away. When do we say that he's exempt? If Reuben says, you owe me money, and Shimon says the next day, no, I don't. No, I don't. If he makes a claim that says I was joking, Aval Amar on the top of Chav Tesam and Beis, but if he says, Lo, are you Dvar Ma'olam? No, this thing never happened, then Huchsa Kafran, then he's an established liar and we don't believe him. Rav Papa Brei Ravacha Barada, Hachi Amrina Mishmei Derava Kol Mila Dechti or Dechiri. So he argues, he says, no, even if he doesn't say I was joking, he says I never said it. He's not required to remember. Anytime you make an offhand flipping comment, you're not required to remember everything you said. So he could say, oh, I never said that. Even though he actually said it, it's still not going to be an indictment against him because he could say, I wasn't serious about that idea, so of course I don't remember it. Somebody who hid witnesses for his friend Mekilte, he hid him under the bed. So Amrei Manoli Biyadcha, he says, you owe me money. Amrei, hey, yes, Amrei. He says, can those who are sleeping and those who are awake be witnesses against you? Amrei lo, no. So Amrei lo. He said, I'm not going. I don't trust. I'm not appointing anybody witnesses, so he's not responsible. Somebody put the witnesses in the grave. So he had him in the graveyard. He says, you owe me $100. Amrei, hey. Says, yes, I do. Can the living and the dead be witnesses against you? Amrei lo. He said, no. I'm Reb Shimon. Amar Lelo. He said he's not appointing them witnesses. He's not responsible. Amar Avina Vitamer Papa Shmamina Mehadam Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. From this idea that that he said where he said no, we see Tzarch Shayomer Ateme Dai that you need to say you are my witnesses. Loshnaki Amar Lovev Loshnaki Amar Malvet. From the fact that it says you need to say you are my witnesses, it doesn't matter who says it. But at Vishasik Lava, but it doesn't matter if the borrower says it. It doesn't matter if the lender says it and the borrower is quiet. Time of the Amar lo velo. What's the reason why the borrower here is not responsible to pay? Because he said no. Of a lo Amar of a lishasik, but if he was quiet, hachinami, he'd be responsible to pay. Unless he clearly said, I'm not appointing them as witnesses. Ahuda v'karle kav rashu. There was a person who they used to address him by this phrase kav rashu, meaning to say he's got a whole bunch of documents against him, meaning to say that there's a lot of contracts against him. He owes a lot of money to a lot of people. Amar man masek bi. He said, who's going to make a claim against me? So Ella Ploni says, no, none of these documents are real. The only one is from this person. Also Tavanu Adina. So these people, he said, yeah, they owe me money. They came in and made him a claim in court of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, no, that's not evidence. Why? Adam also a person will make claims, say them out loud because he doesn't want people to think he's rich. So that's not enough evidence. Another case, I like this. This is cute. They called the guy a mouse who sleeps on coins, meaning to say he's very wealthy, but he doesn't benefit from it. Like a mouse who sleeps on coins, the mouse has no benefit from money. When he's about to die, he said, he says, oh, I owe these people money. So after he died, so those people came and they made a claim from the heirs. Also, coming to Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, so Rabbi Shmuel says, so Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi said, listen, when we said that a person doesn't want to make himself rich, that's while he's alive, but after death, he doesn't care if people think he's rich, so he has to pay them. The heirs have to pay. But so what happened then was the heirs went to Paro Palga. They paid half. So then they went to the court. They tried to get the other half. The plaintiffs. So also coming to Rabbi Chia, they came to Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said, no, we can go back to the other logic. I don't agree with Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Yossi said, because we could say that Kishem Shalom also Shalo Asbiyat Atzmo, Kach Adam also Shalo Asbiyat Spanav. Just like he doesn't want to make himself rich, he doesn't want to make his kids look rich. Way, so the people making the claim said, well, so the defendant said, Nazel, the people made the claim said, Nazel and other, so do we have to return the money that we got the first half? So Rabbi Chia said, Amaru Kfar Hora Zakin. No, the Zakin, i.e. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Rabbi Yossi, has already given his ruling, so we're not going to go back on that. Let's say this person admitted that he owes the money in front of two people, and they did a kinyan, kosvin. Then the witnesses can write it down, a contract. But if he didn't do a kinyan in kosvin, they can't write it down. Let's say they admitted in front of three, but they didn't do a kinyan. Three is like a court. So Rava Amar Kosin, because it's like a court, you can write it down. Ravasi Amar in Kosin. Ravasi says you don't write it down because without a kinyan. There was an incident when this happened. He admitted in front of three, and they did not write it down like Ravasi. This document of admission, meaning he admitted in front of three, but they didn't do a kinyan. Zimnin kasvinan. Sometimes we write it down and sometimes we don't. How so? If the three people were gathered there and sitting and he comes in front of them, we don't write it down because they're not there as a court. They're just like witnesses. He sees three people and he comes in. But if he gathered up to three, then kasvina comes. It means he intended to do it as a court, so we write it down. Rava Amar Rava says not enough that he gathers three. He has to say, you are my judges. It's not enough to say you are my judges. He has to go further and he has to establish a specific time for the court case like judges do. Not only that, they have to issue a summons and invite him to the court. It's not enough to just say it. So then the Gemara says, let's say a person admitted about movable objects. that he owes another person. Mikano miyado, and they did it kinyan. Kosvin, we write it down. V'mav and kosvin. Otherwise, we don't write it. But makarka below kano biyado mai. But let's say it's real estate, and they did, and he admitted it, but they didn't do a kinyan. What's the law? Amar amar ein kosvin amar zutra amar kosvin. The dispute whether you write it, we rule like Marzutra that you write it down. Ravina Ikwa with the Maharia. Ravina it came to this place called Maharia. Amrle Ravdimi Barav Puna mi the Maharia Ravina Metaltle Veisnu Beinayu Mai. So the question is, a person in the midst of movables that he has in his possession at the time of the admission, he says that they're the plaintiffs. What's the law? Do we write this down? Do the witnesses write this admission down or not? Do we say, since they're in existence, then it's like real estate, and we write it even without his without the admitter confessing, or do we say it's movable? It's like real estate. Ravash says no, since they haven't been collected yet, so they're still in the possession of the one who's admitting. We have to be concerned that maybe they'll break, and so therefore we don't write it down. Ayodisa, there was a document of admission. It didn't say that he didn't say, he told us to write it and sign and give it to him. Well, this is Rish Lakish. We have a concept that the witnesses do not sign a contract unless the person who was doing it was an adult. And so therefore, the one who's selling it was an adult, because a minor is not allowed to sell, or somebody under 20. And so we see from here that it must have been done properly. So too here also, even though it doesn't say that phrase, the witnesses wouldn't have signed it unless it was done properly, that they said he told us to sign it. The Sofer just forgot to include it. We didn't know if he has to write this. And you think the scribes know that they're not allowed to write it unless they were specifically told, and it must have been a mistake that he told them and they just forgot to include it. You think the scribes knew something we didn't know? No, indeed, that is the case. The scribes knew the actual practical halacha more than the rabbis in this particular case. Okay, so we can go on a little bit.